Today on What's on Your Workbench, Episode 0, we meet the hosts. All right, good day, everybody. I would say good morning or good evening, but we don't know when you're listening to this podcast. But my name is Andrew from craftybeetroot.com. And today with me, co-hosting this podcast is Chili.
Hey everybody, my name is Chili from Orwood Solutions. Good to be with you all today.
As with the good tradition of podcasts, we are starting with an episode 0. This is just a bit of a test for us. This is my first time podcasting. I know, Chili, you've got a little bit of experience doing this. I've got a lot of experience Skyping and Zooming, and I guess we all have over the last few years or last year. But with that, we wanted to give you a bit of a background to this podcast. So when this goes up, there will obviously be an episode 1 up, and this is to just provide a bit of background information for you guys out there about who we are, what we do, and how we got to make this podcast. So before we get too far into this, I guess I just wanted to explain a little bit about what this podcast is. So you may have guessed by the name of the podcast that this is about what's on your workbench. So I classify myself as a maker. Chili, what do you classify yourself as?
I tend to call myself a craftsman.
Yep. And I guess
that pretty well encapsulates it.
Yeah, and I think that in itself is a discussion which we've touched on previously, and I think we'll hold off for another day. But so what we want to do is we just want to basically each week pick something that's just happens to be sitting on our workbench and just have a good old chat about it and talking about the whys, the hows, what we could have done better, what we would have done better if we had better tools, and just get into it and get into the nitty-gritty details. So if this is your jam, we hope you enjoy it. And we hope that at some point you'll be able to offer feedback to us about what have you got on your workbench. So to get us started, I thought it would be good to have something called a maker ID. I kind of stole this idea from one of the podcasts I listen to, but I figure if we get guests on, or even just to get to know us, I think you can tell a lot about a person, about their materials they like to use, the techniques they like to use. So, Chili, let's do quick fire. What is your favorite material?
Yeah.
What is your favorite tool or technique? What is your favorite project to date? And do you have a holy grail project?
All right. So my favorite material, I work in both wood and metal. Right now, mostly in wood, just because of the shop space I have. And I really, my favorite material I'd have to probably say is what's called urban forested wood. So I work with some folks who take trees that are cut down from people's yards or in local parks, and those usually go to the chipper or the landfill. And these guys help make sure that becomes usable lumber instead of just trash. And that's my favorite thing to use. I think you get some really beautiful woods that most people never see or even know about. And that's it makes beautiful projects.
What kind of woods?
My favorite tool.
What kind of woods? Sorry, I'll interrupt you there. What kind of woods have you come across with that? Because that sounds awesome.
Oh, so one of them that I use a lot is elm,
Nice.
Which actually used to be really prevalent in furniture making and just kind of fell off. Everybody knows about maple, which is generally sugar maple when people are talking about that, like a really hard, dense maple, and walnut, oak. Those are kind of like the staples, but there's all these other amazing woods out there. One of them that was the coolest I found so far is the wood from a box elder tree, which is a type of maple, but it's a soft maple. And the box elder bugs, they bring a fungus into the tree as they eat into the wood. And when you cut the wood, it looks brown. Like when I go pick up the wood, it looks like these brown stains because it has oxidized. But when you clean it up, it actually turns vibrant red.
Oh,
So you have
wow.
these beautiful vibrant red streaks through the wood. Yeah, it's super cool.
Yeah, no,
Um,
that is
so
awesome.
the other one here here in Colorado in the U.S. where I am, we have a tree called the Russian olive tree, which is actually an invasive species. They'll pay you to cut it off your property. That's how bad it is. Um, and so it's a weed. It's trash. People just are trying to get rid of it, but it actually has beautiful chocolate tones to it. The only drawback is it smells horrible when you cut it.
No pain, no gain.
Yeah.
No, that's awesome. I've never even
So
heard of that. It
as far
makes
as
perfect sense to be able to use some product that people are chopping down, and rather than going to a wood chipper, like why not make awesome things out of it?
yeah, yeah. Um, as far as my favorite tool goes, um, I am a huge fan of my trying plane, or my joiner plane, some people will call it. A huge long bed hand plane that you use to make rough lumber square and flat. I do the vast majority of that by hand in my shop. Um, I only have a couple of power tools. Probably about 90% of my work is hand tools. And that's one that I really, really enjoy using.
Nice.
Um, and techniques, it's kind of hard to say because I really, really love old fashioned hand tool techniques, working a piece of wood with a blade, or a wedge, and your muscle. That's about it.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, I did a project
Um,
a while back where it was all hand tools, and I utmost respect to you for that, because not only doing the skills to do that, but maintaining those tools and getting them to work for you. Because I've still got a lot to learn about using those planes and maintaining them and keeping them sharp.
yeah, yeah. There's definitely a certain element of tool maintenance involved with hand tools that you don't necessarily have with some power tools.
Absolutely.
Um, as far as my favorite project to date, that's kind of like if I were to ask you to pick a favorite child.
Oh, that's done. That's
It's really
easy.
it's really hard to do. I, I think that I will always have a soft spot for the very first large project I did that got me started and made me decide to quit my job and do this full time. And that was the communion rail that I made for Centennial Lutheran Church in Inglewood. Um, it was a massive project. It was 400 plus hours of metalwork and woodwork. I learned a lot of new techniques and skills during that project. So I'll probably always have a soft spot for that. Um,
Yeah,
Definitely.
no, that was beautiful. You did a lot of hand carving on that, I think, if I remember correctly, and chiseling out on that.
Yeah, I bit off way more than was probably intelligent to, which is
Never.
kind of my trademark. I had never carved before in my life, but I could picture these relief carvings that I wanted on the piece. And luckily, we had a guy in the congregation who was a master carver, but didn't carve anymore because he had Parkinson's. And so he was the brains and I was the hands. I said, "Hey, how do I do this? This is what I want." And it was awesome. That was
Wow.
that was probably my first kind of official relationship with another craft worker that really helped spring me forward.
No, that's awesome. And then finally, Holy Grail
Um,
project.
Oh, I was so excited when I saw this. I think we all have the Holy Grail project, and mine is I'm also kind of a gearhead. I like classic cars. I like things that go fast. So I want to build a post-war sprint car,
Oh,
which
wow.
is those ones that kind of look like a Twinkie,
Yeah.
and have uncovered wheels. Um, the way they used to do those was they'd take like a Model A chassis and they'd build the car on it backwards. So the
Oh,
back of
wow.
the chassis was actually the front of the car.
Huh.
And they'd scavenge like parts and motors from like tractors and just whatever they could get their hands on to build these. Well, I want to build one, and I want to build the entire body out of wood, like a
Oh,
wood
wow.
strip, like a
Yep.
boat body almost. I think it would be just awesome.
Wow. No, that's a good Holy Grail project. That's when you say bite off more than you can chew, that's definitely I think up in their category of that.
Probably.
Yeah.
So, Andrew, how about you? Favorite material, favorite tool, favorite project to date, and your Holy Grail project?
Well, I guess going back to where I describe myself as a maker, I'm a lot less defined. I wouldn't say I'm more busy than you, but I do have 3 children. And unfortunately, I haven't quite managed to make my making a full-time job. So a lot of my making is stuff that I've wanted or I can't afford to buy outright, or they're things that I just can't make or find just quite how I want. So I've got to go custom, or I'm just fixing up a lot of things. That's a lot of what I'm doing. And I mean, fixing is one of the best ways to learn how to make because you're only working on a small portion of something. So, but having said that, my favorite material to work with, and I've got a lot of favorites, it has to be waxed cotton or waxed canvas. Um, I don't know if you've ever done a lot of sewing, but when you're sewing modern fabrics, they stretch and you've got to have specialized machines or they're sheer and thin and they just rip up. But waxed cotton is just unreal. It's like sewing cardboard. You can fold it, you can make your seam lines, you can mark it in the wax. And then the more you use it, the more life it has to it. And it's a super practical fabric. You can make it yourself. You just get some, some relatively cheap cotton fabric that's a canvas or whatever you really want. You can use denim. You add the wax to it, makes it waterproof, and then it just brings this life to it. And you can use like different colors. And yeah, no, I'm a sucker for a good waxed cotton.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's just and it's one of those things that I'd never really used, and I was just working on one project, and then suddenly I was looking for everything needs to be waxed cotton, wax everything. It's it gets a bit out of control. But then we've along that line, it's pretty well any kind of high quality fabric that you're using. Like I made a jacket once, and it was out of boiled wool, and it was just unreal to work with. Same with good linen, like a solid linen. It's these old school fabrics are just unreal to work with. They just I love them. They're awesome. So moving on to favorite tool or technique. This one I struggled with. I was like, oh, what am I going to do? And this one, I'm going to go to a bit of modern technology, and that's my vinyl cutter. So I have a Silhouette Cameo 3 at home, and we'll get a little bit into it when we kind of talk about our origin stories, but I do a lot of card making, but I also do a lot of like props because I love movie props and I just think they're cool and pointless and why not? And a vinyl cutter is kind of like that cheapest entry point to CNC. So, I mean, nowadays 3D printers are pretty well up there, but I kind of haven't delved into that because working in 2D on a computer is much easier than 3D. And so with a few basic skills on a computer, you can turn any kind of picture you see into a sticker or a stencil, and then you can transfer that and you can bring like a really high quality edge to a project. So you can have a pretty rough worn, shelf, but if you have a really nice kind of label on it of what's in there, it really brings it to a higher level. And it's a really easy, quick way to do it. And I just absolutely love it. And my poor Silhouette is just abused with everything. I mean, I've put fabric through it, I've put cardboard through it, I've put vinyl through it, I've tried to put aluminum foil through it, I've put wood through it, like thin veneers, and it just loves it. Well, it doesn't love it, but it's one of those machines that it sounds sick from day one, but you kind of learn to just love that through as it's trying to cut whatever you put in there. But it's just, well, I don't,
how did the aluminum foil work?
not great. I ended up having to go to.
How did the aluminum foil work?
Not great. I was hoping to kind of like I was trying to find a thicker one and kind of embed it, like emboss it, and it just tore it up. So I ended up having to go with an acid etch for that particular project, as you do. And yeah, it's one of those tools that if it broke, it would just be straight on the internet, order another one, wouldn't even hesitate. It's just one of those things that I couldn't live without now. And even my wife, like, we use it all the time for different projects, and it's just great. Like, we needed a whole bunch of sticker labels for the kids' water bottles. So we just went on the vinyl card, typed in a few things, copied it, cloned it across the whole sheet of paper, and then cut it out. And then we had, a whole sheet of stickers with Hagi on it, or whatever our names were. So, favorite project to date. Oh, this one was a tricky one too. I probably narrow it down to two. One of them was the final product, and it was really the first time I jumped into making wooden projects properly. I've dabbled a lot in making wooden things over the years, but we needed a craft cupboard for all of our craft supplies, and there was just nothing on the market that suited. And after looking around, I went, no, I can't find what I want. I'm going to have to make it. And at the time I was living in the US, but I knew I'd be coming back to Australia. So I didn't want to invest in a lot of power tools that I wouldn't be able to bring back. And so I actually invested in a couple of planes, some hand saws, and I just basically went to town and made this. And that was one of my first videos I put up on YouTube. And to this day, it's still one of my favorites. That was just an unreal process, going through that whole project from start to finish with hand tools, learning a whole bunch of techniques, and just seeing what can be done if you just spend the time making sure it's right. And that one, to this day, I still look at that in the corner of the craft room, and it's just awesome. I love the way it looks. And that was using a lot of poplar, very available at the hardware store. And that was my first kind of exposure to using a wood other than kind of pine. And that if you are using a nice wood, and I like poplar, I think it's a really nice wood to work with. It's just, again, it's kind of like the fabric. You use the high quality materials, it makes life a lot easier down the line. And then the other favorite project would probably be, and this is probably more from the process. So the end product was good, and I love the end product, but just it was one of those ideas that came to me, and I dedicated a weekend to start to finish, and it just, every step of the project, every step of the process, it just hit those marks, and I just got that warm fuzzy feeling of like, oh, this is coming together, this is going to look awesome. And what it was a Halloween costume for my son. So I had made myself a Master and Commander captain's uniform, and I wanted my little Royal Marine with me. So I made like a red coat from like the late 1700s, early 1800s. And I didn't have a pattern. So I made the pattern myself based on my jacket pattern. I didn't have a dress form. My child was asleep at the time. So I kind of just took some rough measurements while he was asleep, tape measure lying across it. And I was like, all right, let's see if I can do this. And so on that evening, I made my pattern and my outer. On the next day, I made the liner. And at no point did I really have to rip it up and start again. Like, it just, every concept I had just worked. Every measurement I took, it just worked. And then by like that Sunday afternoon, I was able to put it on him, and it just looked unreal. And yeah, it was just that process of, I've got an idea, to it being fully executed in that time frame was just, yeah, it's normally you're beating your head against a brick wall going, I wish I had that tool, or I had that fabric, or I bought the wrong thing, or I took the wrong measurement, I've got to undo it. And yeah, so that would probably be my favorite projects, one more for the process and one more for the final product.
I really just like the statement, I measured my child while he slept.
Well, sometimes it's easier than waking them up and dealing with that. So Holy Grail
So how
project.
about your Holy Grail project?
Yeah, exactly. This one's a tricky one. I dream big, but I also have noticed that I don't dream too big when it comes to projects. I've kind of like, is that something I would actually reasonably do? And so in my brain, there's always bubbling projects all the time. But probably the Holy Grail project that I would say three at the moment. There's three that are kind of, I don't think there's one that I'll want to definitely get to. There's two that I don't know when I will get to it. The first one is a music box. So part of my Christmas tradition is we open Christmas presents on Christmas Eve. And part of that is walking downstairs or walking into the room with the Christmas tree and having all the candles lit, having the tree lit, the presents under the Christmas tree. And you get this unreal experience. And part of that is having a music box playing in the background of just, Christmas carols playing along. And so what I want to do is be able to make one that I can customize the music to. And so I can select the carols that I want, the combinations that I want at the speeds I want. And I want it all to be mechanical. So I want gears, I want it to wind up, and I want it to be made of like a beautiful wood with maybe some Christmas kind of relief in there. And then and have that as kind of like an heirloom for my family, as that's part of our history. So yeah, that's definitely up there. I'm really interested in making a Greenland canoe, or Greenland kayak rather. So a skin on frame. I know you've made some paddle boards, and I'm sure you've dabbled or looked at those kayaks, and just that whole process looks awesome. It's a good level of skill level for me. It's not definitely outside the realm. It's more about the materials and the time, and quite frankly the need. We've got other canoes and kayaks, so we don't need one. So that kind of drives some of these projects out. And then probably the last holy grail for me is I really want to make a Mercury spacesuit. I just think they look awesome. It would be an absolute feat of engineering and fabric work to actually make that happen. I mean, there's always costumes that I want to make, like suits of armors and stuff, but I think like a 1-to-1 Mercury replica would be just unreal.
That would be really cool. I've been following a guy on Instagram that does Greenland kayaks, and it's really interesting. And I'm fighting the urge to to make one.
They make it look so easy. It's just like, oh, you just hammer this together, some strips of wood, bend some steam. It's easy. It's like, I don't think that's going to be my experience.
Yeah. Just saddle stitch this. Yep. No big deal.
Yeah, and just big thing of resin over the no, it's definitely a huge undertaking on something like that. So that's a little bit about us, but let's go a little bit deeper. So Chili, what's your origin story? How did you get to a point now where you have, well, it sounds like you've got an awesome workshop where you've actually got a finishing space and a working space. It's your business now. You've got a podcast now. Well, how did you get here with your skills and your tools? And I don't think I've ever actually talked to you about this.
That's so from a very young age, I knew that I wanted to open my own business. I wanted to be an entrepreneur. And that's what I went to college for. My bachelor's degree is in entrepreneurship. From college though, I did go to work for some other folks first, which
like we all have to.
was a great idea. Honestly, I learned a lot of lessons on somebody else's dime. But I was miserable doing that. I was really miserable. And actually, I should say that when I was in high school and college and I was working towards my degree, my goal at that point was to open my own snowboard manufacturer.
Oh, wow.
That was my goal because I used to be a sponsored competitive snowboarder in my younger years.
Oh, nice.
And I was very passionate about that. But I've been building stuff for a long time. My grandpa taught me how to weld. He taught me how to do old school lead body work on cars.
Oh,
So
wow.
not Bondo, but actually molten lead is what you use to fill in body work. And my dad taught me some basic carpentry around the house and stuff. But that first project of the communion rail, that really was the thing that made it click for me in my head that, man, this is what I want to do. Like I was working, anywhere between 60 to 80 hours every week in my job. It was miserable. It was literally killing my soul. It was bad. But even after, a 14, 16-hour day at work, I'd come home and do something to work on the communion rail, and it made me happy. So I realized this is it. This is what I got to do. And I thankfully have a very loving, supportive wife.
You definitely
said,
need those.
Go for it. If that's what you want to do. Yeah, most definitely. It's hard to pass up a very good paying job, with nice benefits and, all of that, and start from scratch. But that's kind of how I got started. And I've, been fortunate enough to meet some really great people along the way that have helped me out and kind of helped grow my business, helped me learn and grow personally and professionally. And that kind of brought me to the point where I am now of just building stuff every day.
Oh, very good. What formal lessons have you had then in woodworking and metalwork, or is it just what you've been taught from your grandpa and your father? Or did you do like shop class in school?
I did actually do shop class in, I was probably one of the last, groups of students to really have shop class. My first middle school I went to, shop class was the only good thing about it. Thankfully, I got out of there and went to nerd school. But in my shop class, we did some really basic woodwork, and it was like, okay, this is a joke. And then the second half of class, we did some metal work, and there were like pre-approved projects you could do, and that was it. And I was like, no, I'm not having any of this. So I talked to my shop teacher. I was like, look, this is what I want to do. And so I had some thin strips of steel that I bent into fancy filigree S curves and put them together to make like a long strip that had hearts in it all the way down, and then used one to come out and hold this like tulip shaped piece of metal. So it was like a wall sconce. You could put a stick candle in it. And I got it all done. We were supposed to make our pieces, and then our teacher was going to weld them together for us. And I was like, no, you're not touching mine. He said, I can do it. And he didn't believe me. So he gave me the MIG welder and said, all right, go for it. Show me. So I dropped the hood, burned some rod, and welded the whole thing together in one shot. And he was just like, okay.
That's awesome.
But I haven't really gone through any incredibly formal training. I haven't done like an apprenticeship. I haven't gone to any of the kind of woodworking schools you can go to. I'm not a good student. I'm a really bad student. So I don't particularly want to do that, but I've had some great opportunities to
especially showing up your shop teacher like that with those welding skills.
Yeah. I've just been very fortunate to be able to spend time with other craft workers and learn from them. I do a lot of trial by error. I learn best that way.
Kindred spirits in that respect.
So that's kind of the way I believe the fancy term would be an autodidact.
I have to lock that one away.
It's a fancy term for someone who's self-taught.
Nice. Oh, very good. That's really interesting. I would have expected from your skill set that it's like, oh no, you must have done a year or two working under somebody, or yeah, doing something, yeah, a bit more professional, or not professional, a bit more formal. But no, that's great. That's hope for us yet.
How about you? How did I know that what you do for a living is like as far away from the maker space as you could possibly get. So how did you end up, doing these kinds of projects?
So it's a long story, so I'm glad you've got time. No, it's I mean, I guess it is a long story. So I grew up in a house where a lot of things were made. When my parents didn't have a huge amount of money, I mean, we weren't poor by any means, but there was definitely a self-reliance attitude. So, I mean, pretty well all the food in the house was cooked from scratch, and everything in the house was not necessarily made from scratch, but it was bought and then it was maintained and it was looked after. And growing up my whole life, it was, oh, okay, well, we can make that. Or we would go to craft shows, and I'm sure there's people at craft shows that hate us for doing it, but we would go and we would look at what people had made and look at it, pick it up, turn it around and go, I think I can make that. And then we would go home and my parents would get the pieces and they would make it. And that attitude was across everything, whether it was cooking, fabric, metalwork, woodwork, horticulture. There was never anything that wasn't too difficult. It was always just like, oh well, we can have a go. Not so much how hard can it be, but well, let's just have a go. If somebody else has made it, then it can be made. And that's led me into a lot of trouble in later years, because you come to find out that there are special tools that allow you to do that, and if you don't have that tool, it's almost impossible. But just that general attitude from day one and growing up around that. And I grew up hearing stories of my dad, you know, when my parents were engaged, he was 20 years old, and I think he was studying to be an engine mechanic with the Air Force, and he would keep his neighbors up late at night with circular saws making furniture for his house, because starting off as an engine mechanic in the Air Force, there wasn't a lot of money, and so all of their furniture to start off with was handmade. And although by the time I came along and my memories formed, most of that had been replaced, my parents still have their original dresses and bed setup that my dad made. And so growing up around that, it was just instilled in me, there's nothing you can't make if you just try and, throw enough time and effort at it. And so obviously growing up, I would help my dad out whenever I could when he was working on projects, but he was pretty busy and didn't have a huge amount of time. He never was a maker for the sake of making. He was always we need a bookshelf, I'm going to make a bookshelf, or we need this, I'm going to make it. It wasn't, I'm just going to make, a Star Wars prop for the sake of it. So he's a much more practical, reasonable man than myself. but but my gateway into making was cards. So from a very early age, I was making birthday cards, I was making Christmas cards. It was something that I didn't think was weird. Looking back, I'm like, man, I was like a boy making these birthday cards out of glitter and stuff. Like, oh, what was everybody thinking? But at no point did my parents say, oh no, you can't do that. You're a boy, you can't be making cards. And so as I got older, I realized this real kind of neat trick with birthday cards is that if you make it yourself, people think it's really special. And to me, I'm just like, well, I'm just using stuff around the house. And to me, it's my time, which is very important to me. But I don't know, it was just one of those things that I made and people seem to really relate to, or they really liked. And so all throughout my high school years, all the birthday cards were handmade by me. And it was kind of one of those tweaks that, I was different to everybody else because, I showed up at a party and gave them a card. They kind of knew that they were getting a handmade, a Hagi creation. But to me, that was just normal. And working with paper is such it's an integral skill because it's cheap, it's easy, but in some ways it behaves like fabric and in other ways it behaves like wood. And so you can learn these skills on gluing because you glue it like wood. Like once it's glued, it's really hard to undo, but it's got this foldability and bendability like fabric. And I remember distinctly there was one thing that I just woke up one Saturday morning when I was probably like 8 or 9, and I just wanted to make a hippopotamus out of paper. I don't know why it was a hippopotamus. I must have been on some craze or something at the time. And I just literally grabbed some paper and a stapler, and I just started folding shapes and making cylinders. And then I made like a foot, and then I made another foot, and then I made a body. And I ended up with this, about a foot size hippopotamus that was just made out of paper and filled with newspaper. And at that point, it was just like, oh, okay, if I can visualize this thing, I can make it into something that I want, or something that's practical. And so there's these little flashes of making things. And unfortunately, I was one of those students that didn't have a proper shop class. We had technology where we did like robotics and made Lego robotics and programming and things like that. And there was a small aspect of it where we made like a solar powered boat. So we were, carving some foam and doing things like that. But yeah, and that's kind of how my maker story progressed. I went to university. Every now and then I would make like little projects because I just wanted to fix something up. So like I had a fish symbol necklace, and I ended up breaking that. It was made out of like a stone, but I ended up remaking it out of wood. Little things like that. And again, I'm very fortunate that my father, while he didn't love me working in his workshop because I left it as a mess, which, that's not a great move. He never said no. And whenever we were working on a project, whether I was fitting water cooling to my computer, whether I was fixing up my motorbike after I crashed it, he was always there to help me. And he was always willing to listen to my ideas. So if I suggested, hey, I think we should do this or that, or what about try that? He would be like, oh, that's a good idea. Let's try that. And so I was never afraid to try new techniques. I was never afraid to give something a go. And so I'm very thankful for that. I mean, I've got some scars to show for, just getting in there and having a go and maybe not having all the instructions. And so that was kind of my background. And then I went to university to be an engineer because I'd always liked making stuff. And so I thought, well, engineering, you make stuff. Well, that's a mistake. An engineer sits behind a desk, and you do have some creative outlets, but you don't have that much. And like you, I was in a position where I just we'd been moving around the US. So not to get too much to it, because we'll get to how we met, our origin story in a little bit, but I was in the US. I'm now currently in Australia. That's where I studied and that's where I was born. I moved to the US with my job, and I had a really great experience for the first 4 or 5 years. And then I moved around and I ended up in Oklahoma. And I didn't have, every time you move, you've got to rebuild your friend group. You've got to rebuild all of those social networks. And so I didn't have a lot of friends. And so I was at home working on things. And like you, I found solace in making things. Being in the workshop, having an idea, and then seeing that idea come into a 3D object, or even just that process, it just captivated me, and it just gave me energy. And so I could work, like a 12-hour day or a 10-hour day or whatever, deal with kids, because at that point I had 2 or 3 kids. And I still had energy on a Friday night to work till 3 o'clock in the morning in the workshop. And I'd wake up at 6 o'clock in the morning to, get up with the kids. And my wife would be like, oh, don't you need sleep? And it was like, no, I need to be in the workshop. That's more important to me than sleep at this point. And then a couple of things kind of lined up at that same time. So being in the US, Halloween is huge. And at that point, my daughter was getting old enough to start celebrating Halloween. And I thought, well, if I'm going to be walking around with my daughter, I guess I should dress up too. And if I'm going to dress up, well, we're not going to do this by half measures. And so that's how I got into sewing. And so I started off with a Tusken Raider or a Sand People from Star Wars. And my wife loves to tell the story that she showed me how to thread the sewing machine, and then she's never been allowed back on the sewing machine, which is only partially true. I let her on it occasionally. And then along with that, I started to follow some makers like Adam Savage on, who's obviously famous from Mythbusters, but he has a YouTube channel, and he is very much an eclectic maker. He makes so many crazy things. And then I guess the other thing that lined up with that was making movie props. And the reason why I like making movie props like a Star Wars blaster or a lightsaber or a Harry Potter wand is it's so pointless. It's, I've got a glass cupboard full of this stuff that I've made, and if it burnt to the ground, it's ultimately meaningless. But to me, it means something because of its meaninglessness. I'm spending that time because I want to, and it's fun, and I'm enjoying it, and I know that it's, I'm not making something, but I feel it's healthy for you to be doing these things, knowing that we are only on Earth for a finite time, and that these things are just made of wood and metal, and that they aren't forever. And I feel like sometimes we get wrapped up in, I'm not going to belay people that enjoy sports, but sports people sometimes get a bit excited about their sports, and they don't realize that this is kind of pointless. And while with my stuff that I make, I can look and go, yeah, I spent 100 hours on that, and yeah, really, it's not worth anything. But I love that. For me, that just it means that I've got something that somebody else would have to waste 100 hours on to have something that's equally as pointless. And so therefore I'm the only one that have that one unique thing. And so, yeah, and then it's just kind of blown up from there with kids. Like the kids needed beds. I was unable to find beds that would suit. So I made them. I went to look for a chest of drawers. I couldn't find ones that I liked, so I made them. And so now I'm at this point where if I can't find what I want, I'll make it, and I'm not afraid to try it. And obviously, it can be quite painful, literally and emotionally, when you're making things and they just fail and fail and fail. But there's that, I don't know, I can almost call it like a hit you get when you, and I'm sure you've had this feeling, Chili, when you first make something, when you're working on a piece of wood and you join it together, and it just maybe it's when a joint fits together. Or for me, it's like when you sew fabric and it suddenly you put it on. Like I made a dress for my wife, and you put it on and it just looked way better than I thought it would, and it just fit, and it was just like you just get this rush and you're like, I need that again, and you just, that making buzz, and then you've got to do all the finishing work and the painting and the sanding, and you're just like, oh, why do I do this? But like you just remember that back to that rush of just having that, oh, it actually worked as I thought in my head. And so, yeah, and then what I've done is when I was making things, I wanted to capture those feelings. And so that's why I started making the videos on YouTube, was so that I could look back and go, I remember making that. And those, I remember spending 2 hours going down the wrong rabbit hole. And there's nothing worse than editing a video, watching you making a mistake that you knew is going to be a mistake, and you just see all this video of you working so hard at it, and then you're like, yep, you're going to get to that point and you're just going to throw it out, Andrew, and you're just like, but it's, yeah, and that whole process. So it's, for me, it's the finished product is something that I can't get any other way, but it's also that process. It's just getting to that, and just that making is, yeah, I'm sure you're in a similar way.
Yeah. I really like what you brought up about your father. Always being willing to listen to your ideas and help. I think that person is instrumental in learning to be a maker or a craft worker. For me, that person was my grandpa, and he would always, no matter what crackpot idea I had, he was like, "Yep, let's do it." But he lived 8 hours away, so most of the time I had to abide by the ask for forgiveness, not permission principle.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Like
I've never
in middle school,
done that.
in middle school, when I after I switched schools and I went to nerd school, is what I call it, because you had to test in, and we didn't have PE, we didn't have shop class, we were just nerds, and it was great. I loved it. But in our science class, one year we had to we were building catapults, and we had to build our own individually out of balsa wood, and then the two science classes each built their own large scale catapult as a class, and we pitted them against each other. But when I was building my balsa wood one in class, I got really frustrated, and I was like, this is this is silly. Like the one I was supposed to make a ballista. So kind of like a giant, crossbow almost. And it just, you can't put any tension on balsa wood, it snaps. Like, so
Yeah.
it doesn't really work. Like, and I wasn't just going to put a rubber band on there and launch a paper ball. So I asked my science teacher, I said, hey, can I take mine home and work on it? I want to really do this right. He was like, yeah, that's fine. You can take it home, bring it in tomorrow. So when I got home, I hitched my wagon to my bike. I rode it to the hardware store and grabbed a bunch of 2x4s and rode home. And while my parents, before they got home from work, I built a rope tension, twisted rope tension ballista in the garage that launched softballs.
Nice.
And then when my dad got home, said, hey, by the way, can you drive me to school tomorrow? Because I need to put this in your truck. So I took it back to school the next day, and my science teacher was like, what's wrong with you? And so we got to test it, right? So we took it outside to the playground. I loaded a softball in it and proceeded to break a window in the apartment next to the school.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a good story. You should have put that into your origin story. I like that one.
So how about should we chat a little bit about how we met?
Yeah, let's go into that. So yeah, like I guess I'll start with me, because I guess I was moving around. So I was studying engineering, and I ended up in North America. I ended up being there for a total of 8 years, and in those travels, I ended up at in Denver. And so we were looking for a local church, and to be honest, with one kid, we only had one at the time. For us, service times is a big deal. So we looked around and we went to a church, and it just wasn't our fit. And then we ended up at this little church in Centennial, and it was and that's where we met Chili and his wife, lovely wife. And unfortunately, we were only in Colorado for about 8 months. But yeah, we definitely met and bonded, and yeah, I guess that's the simple side of it. Did I miss anything on Chili?
Not really. It was, I mean, so my wife was the pastor there.
Yep.
At the church, and it was essentially us and a bunch of I use this term affectionately, gray hairs. we were the youngest people in church by a good 25 years.
Yep.
And so we were pretty excited when the Hagees rolled in.
Yeah,
I guess,
yeah,
we just.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, and I guess what we first bonded over was music. So I was playing guitar, and you, I believe, taught yourself guitar as well, just like myself. And and so we were actually playing together, and I don't think we even realized how much we were going to be, how much similar we were in the fact that we were going to be making a whole bunch of stuff. But yeah, and then at that was around the point that I really started to get into the making, and that's where the whole Halloween idea kind of started to blossom from for me. It was at that critical point.
Yeah, that was it's been so much fun to watch. Watch you continue to expand in what you're doing as a maker. And I would probably even say to watch you kind of focus in too on your niche a bit, because although you do a massive breadth of making, I think, at least from my perspective, you really seem to take to kind of that costume prop, area. That really seems to be where, at least that's what I always see that blows me away as you're doing stuff. It's just like, this is crazy. Like, how do you see this? How do you just do this? And so it's been really fun for me to watch that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's the same from my side, seeing you start your own business. Now your YouTube channel's getting up and going. And obviously your Instagram and Facebook, those pictures that come through of just, usually I'm just sitting there going, oh, I wish I had that tool, or oh, I wish I had access to that wood. But most of the time that's awesome. And I just love looking at it. And I was actually just reviewing it, a lot of your stuff that you'd made last night. And, like your paddle boards are just absolutely unreal. We'll have to definitely talk about them one day.
Yeah, those are fun.
And I'll give you a little secret to the reason why I love working with fabric. There's no sanding or painting or varnishing. It's awesome. Or gluing. It's so good.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite parts about metalwork is no sanding.
Yeah, it's the things we do for our crafts. But there are button making and buttonholes, and I guess there are other things. But yeah. So and I guess the final thing I wanted to touch on is how we came up with this podcast. And I guess I will take a little bit of claim to that, because I was actually sitting in this very workshop and I was making something and I was doing some wood skills, and we'll talk about it in the next episode. And I was just like, you know what? I bet somebody with more knowledge than me could give me some good pointers. And, and I'm like, who do I know that kind of does this? And really, I was looking at all of my friends and family, and you're the only one that's consistently making things. And so my mind just went straight to you and was like, oh. And then the other aspect of it is, while I was in the US, and like I've mentioned my parents a lot, pretty well, we always chat on a Friday night through Skype. So everybody that's been doing it over Zoom for like the last year, that's been our life for 10 years. And one of the key aspects of that Friday night chat is, what have you been working on? Because, my dad's restoring the car he learned to drive in at the moment. And I'm always obviously fixing up things. And my mum, she loves doing cross stitch and quilting, and, she loves making dolls. And so there's this element to our conversation about, what are you working on? What would you do different? How would you do that? And I thought it would be great to be talking to somebody who's got a different set of skills to myself, but who's equally passionate about their craft, and have a discussion about, what would you do different? Why did you choose that? Why didn't you do it this way? Or did you know you could do this or do that? And so, my mind leapt to you, and you were so receptive. So thanks for joining on this crazy experiment.
I was happy to. I was really excited because, like I told you, my brain had been kind of working around a lot of this stuff lately of, the conversation between makers and craft workers specifically. That was something I've been kicking around in my head. So it was fortuitous when you messaged me about this. I was like, yeah, this is perfect. I'm on.
No, that's great. So I think that brings us to the end of our episode 0. I think we've done a good job. That's 50 minutes. We've been managed to talk. So I think we've got something here. I guess, where can people find you, Chili? And what do you have? Can you give us a sneak peek about what we'll be talking about next week's episode?
Ooh, it's gonna have to do with this right back here.
Oh.
It's not a lot to go off of, but safe to say it is reclaimed material, and it's being completely turned into something different from what it was. So I'm excited about that one.
Oh, I can't wait.
What about you?
Awesome. I think I'm going to go with the origin of this podcast. So we've already kind of talked briefly about it, but it'll be a little bit about that apple cutter that started the whole thing. So it's not currently on my workbench, so it's a little bit of a lie, but we won't peel too much behind the curtain about what's going on here. But yeah, no, I think that'll be my first bit of classic woodwork and carving. I think will be the starting episode. So where can people find more about you, Chili? And we'll have links to all this in the description or wherever you find this. But for those that are just listening, where can they find?
So they can, you can find more of my work at my website at orwoodsolutions.com, which is OREWOOD, because what I do often brings together wood and metal. So that's where the name Orwood came up from.
Of course.
Or you can find me on Facebook at Orwood Solutions or Instagram at OrwoodCS.
Awesome. And you can find me at craftybeetroot.com. I believe we'll have to do a bit of an episode on our names and how we got there, but yours is much simpler than mine. So maybe we'll talk about that another day. So craftybeetroot.com. Apparently the word beetroot is an Australian term. So there we go. I have a YouTube channel, Crafty Beetroot. If you search for that, it'll come up. I am still working on Instagram and Facebook pages. They're there, but they're not quite under that branding yet. So stay tuned for that, full-time job and everything. But yeah, so we hope you catch us on the next episode, and happy making for those out there. And we hope to find out what's on your workbench soon.